Does anyone know where Grendyl is? I'm pretty sure we actually have the answer, but before I get into that, I need to address two major things I missed in the last video because I'm a silly goose that sometimes misses stuff. And by the way, a huge thank you to everyone in the comments from the last video who came to talk about all the hints you found about Genestealers coming to Darktide, because you helped me realize what I forgot. The first point being, I completely forgot that Sienna's new career in Vermintide 2 is super important to Darktide. One very compelling reason why I'd be wrong about Genestealers being added as a new faction in Darktide is that they traditionally aren't a faction that would have an alliance with Nurgle, and likely the two would fight. From a gameplay dynamic perspective, the chances of Genestealers being added for Darktide's anniversary on November 30th are pretty low, because Fatshark would have to do all the work and programming necessary to make two opposing types of enemies fight. That would be a monumental undertaking, and the game already needs many other things fixed. An update this big wouldn't happen for years. Except for the fact that it's done. It's done, they already did the work. Enter Fatshark's latest content for Vermintide 2, Sienna's Necromancer career. This career is very special because Sienna can raise skeletons that do more than just look cool. They fight enemies. Those calcium carkers get right up into the Paxhorn's grill to give them the spooking of a lifetime. Mechanically, they're basically a micro-faction. They protect, they attack, they constantly clack for additional snack. They're more or less autonomous aside from following Sienna's instructions. And according to a Fatshark's dev blog about their development, we call them minions rather than bots because even though they feel similar, they don't share the same code or design space. So having done the groundwork, we now have a bit of tech in place for enemies fighting enemies. We're pretty excited to be toying around with that for the future. This is basically confirmation that they're planning on implementing this in Darktide. And this is just speculation on my part, but it could be sooner than you'd think. If work on Sienna's necromancy began in earnest after the release of Saltspire's Warrior Priest, that's around 2 years fighting factions could have been cooking. But it's actually quite possible this has been in development even longer, since that same dev blog says they had this career in mind while they were working on Grail Knight, which was back in 2020. Let's continue my embarrassment and things I missed, shall we? So last video, I mentioned Voxes 1 through 6 from Operative Wormwood that plot dump the events leading up to the game, and then the two most recent Voxes where she's in hiding and being hunted. Those are Voxes 9 and 10. Somehow, I missed that there's a Vox 7 and a Vox 8. Literally did not know that they existed until I was doing this video. I don't know how, I have no excuse. I might have brainworms. Vox 7 isn't relevant, but let's listen to what Vox 8 has to tell us.
Gunfire, often just streets away. And when it goes quiet, we hear the chanting. I assume it's the traitors, worshipping whatever dark gods they found on the fringe worlds. If it's not them, then may the Emperor protect us, for I have no idea what could be making those sounds. I have just been told there are rumors of things moving in the lower levels. Dark things that are not human, that were never human.
Well, that seems pretty explicit. When we pair this with Vox 9 and 10, we have Fatshark literally telling us through Wormwood, hey, there are other sources of cult-like chanting in Tertium. Wormwood's story has transitioned into a second narrative now that her role in discovering Nurgle's cult of admonition is done. When you put the dark things that aren't human together with the announcement on the Morningstar about Xeno sightings in the Deep Hive, and then combine that with what we know lore-wise about Genestealers, that they generally set up shop in the lowest hive sectors, we've got a very clear picture painted. A half-human, half-Tyranid monster picture, but art is meant to be subjective and interesting, right? You know who else is interesting? Grendyl. Is that name a reference to Beowulf? Is that why the servitor doesn't have a head and the face briefly turns into a holographic skull at the end of the locker room speech? I don't know about that, but what I do know is that the game tells us where Grendyl is in the very first scene. Everyone is wondering where Grendyl is. If Atoma is so important to the Imperium resource-wise that they won't glass it to get rid of Nurgle, why isn't the Inquisitor here already to address the situation? Well, the Seer Psyker seems to think that Grendyl is busy handling something else.
My beloved says that Grendyl is distracted by other matter.
Cool story, bro, but distracted by what? Where? Have you ever noticed that the name Tertium is basically the word tertiary, as in the third hive city of Atoma? And we can be pretty damn sure that there's at least one other hive on the planet, because if the rejects start asking about it, Morrow cuts in to shut you right up. And if you're wondering what this has to do with Inquisitor Grendyl, well...
Keep him intact. No accidents. My master wants to interrogate him as soon as we reach the hive.
Yep. Grendyl's already on Atoma. If you've listened to Wormwood's Voxes, you'll know that she calls Grendyl the Master.
Where is the master? Where is Grendyl?
So now we know that Zola is on the Tankard Bastion in orbit of Atoma Prime before making their final approach. How do we know the Tankard Bastion is over Atoma? Because Masozi is close by and at the end of the tutorial flies you and Zola into the Morning Star. Masozi's dropship isn't built to withstand the warp, meaning the planet we see the Bastion over is Atoma, or a lot of time has passed between the tutorial and arriving to the Morning Star, and we all just age phenomenally well. Alright, so Wolford the prisoner is being taken into Grendyl for interrogation, and we know Grendyl is an intertium, which means Grendyl has to be in another hive city. What's the Inquisitor doing there? That's a really good question, and for once, I'm not sure it's Genestealers. It's definitely possible, given all the setup we have for them to come into the game, that Genestealers have spilled into Tertium after overwhelming a different hive, but there's just no way to know that for sure. Whatever Grendyl is doing in another hive city on Atoma, it must be pretty damn huge to keep them away from the Nurgle crisis. Or is the Inquisitor dead? Hey, thanks for watching. If you haven't seen it yet, check out my last video, which is all about a mystery Tyranid creature and Genestealers possibly being added to the game, and a commander in the Morning Star who might be an actual traitor. Be sure to come back to my channel soon too, because the next Darktide video is going to be a comprehensive crawl through the entire story. Or, you know, subscribe so YouTube will tell you when it's out. Until then, cleanse the mutant, burn the heretic, purge the Xenos. I'll see you out there against the Darktide.